make some almond raisin loaf. This is a Dutch recipe. It's got almond paste and raisins in a loaf, which is delicious. I know I normally tell everybody I don't like raisins. There's a couple places where raisins are acceptable. So regular raisin bread, acceptable, and this loaf, it's amazing. I don't like raisins, but this is really good. So I have 2 cups of raisins. I just bought the Sultan raisins, there's the Thompson, there's all different kinds of raisins you can buy. I just bought whatever was cheapest at Superstore. 2 cups of raisins, and I'm gonna put 3 cups of water. I'm just starting with hot water just because I have to bring this to a boil and it'll just go a bit quicker this way. So we're gonna bring our raisins to a boil on the stove, and we're gonna boil that for 4 minutes. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna make the raisins a little bit more plump and juicy, but it's also going to take a lot of the sugars and stuff out of the raisins and go into the water. And you're not discarding the water. You're going to keep this because this is going to be the main liquid inside your loaf. But all that raisin sweetness is going to be mixed through the whole loaf really nice because it's going to be in the water. So we're going to get this boiling on the stove for 4 minutes. And while that's boiling, we'll get our almond paste ready. So I'll be right back. We're going to make our almond paste, which is going to be inside the loaf. I've used almond paste for several other recipes, so same basic recipe. I'm just doing the amount that I need for my 2 loaves, so it's about a half a recipe that I would normally use for a larger speculaas. So what I have is almond flour. You can buy ground almonds or you can buy almond flour. And the almond flour is just much finer than the ground almonds. So I have 2 cups of ground almonds and 1.5 cups of icing sugar. We're just going to get this into our mixer. We're going to add in 1 egg. I have a large egg. If it doesn't all come together, that means we need a little bit more egg. So if you're using a medium or small egg, it might not be quite enough moisture. So I'll show you what it's supposed to look like, and then you'll see whether or not you need to have a little bit more egg. We're also going to do a teaspoon of almond extract, or a little bit extra. And we need to have a teaspoon of some lemon juice. You can use lemon juice squeezed from a lemon, or I just buy the real lemon in the bottle. And we're just going to do a teaspoon of that as well. And we're just going to mix this together. So come and take a look at that. And you just want to mix it till it all comes together nice. It just takes a minute to get that to come together. If you would end up using 2 eggs, it makes it quite sticky, but we want this to be not too sticky because we want to be able to work with it later. So it just takes a minute for it to come together. If you look at the bottom of the bowl, you can see there's crumbs on the bottom yet. You just want all of this to come together, all in a ball. So just let it mix up until that all keeps everything clean on the bottom. Almost there. Alright, so I'll show you what this looks like. Alright, so we've got the almond paste. So it's sticky, but it's not all coming off of my hands, so we're going to easily be able to work with this. So I'm going to be putting this just in a Ziploc bag, and I'm going to put it in the fridge until I need it later on. I just wanted to get this mixed up and ready so that when I need it later, when I'm putting my loaf together, it'll be ready to go. So we're just going to put it in a Ziploc bag so it doesn't dry out in the fridge. Raisins have been boiling on the stove for about 4 minutes, and when it's done boiling, you want to put in a couple tablespoons of butter. You can measure exact or just estimate. It's okay to estimate. So we just want this butter to melt in here. This will help the raisins not clump together, and this also adds the little bit of fat that we need into the loaf. So we're going to have to let this cool completely now. So whether you put that in the fridge or you just leave it on the counter until that cools completely down. And when it's cooled down, we can assemble the loaf. All right, so while my raisins were cooling, I got a few things ready here. I've greased my loaf pans a little bit, and I put parchment paper in as well. I just find it so much easier to get your loaves out when you have parchment paper in your loaf, because then after it's out of the oven, you can just lift it out to put it on a rack to let them cool completely. I've also cubed up my almond paste. I believe the original recipe actually leaves it in a log and right in the middle of the loaf. However, I like to cube it up and get it mixed through all the batter so that every slice has nice little chunks of your almond paste. The reason we cooled down our raisins, if this is too hot, it would kind of melt your almond paste and you wouldn't get those nice little chunks in the dough. I've also got my dry ingredients here. So I have 4 cups of flour. I have 1.5 cups of sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking soda, and 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and a teaspoon of salt. So these are going to be the dry ingredients that we're going to be mixing in to our wet ingredients. So I'm going to start out with 2 eggs in my mixer, and I just have my whipping beater on. So we're just going to get those eggs started. And you also don't want your water too hot because you don't want it to cook the egg that you have in here. That's another reason to cool it down. So we are going to be adding our wet and dry ingredients to our egg. And I'm going to be adding a little bit at a time. So I'm going to add a bit of my raisins and my liquid here. And some of my dry ingredients, and we'll get that mixing, and then we'll add a little bit more. And then we'll just keep adding a little bit of the wet and a little bit of the dry. You want all that batter to mix it up well. A little bit more of your wet with the raisins. The last little bit of flour. All right, so I'm going to just mix this till it's just coming together where the dry ingredients are mixed in. And then we're going to stop. So now the last bits of mixing we're going to do are going to be done by hand. I'm going to be mixing in my almond paste by hand. I don't want to do it with the whipping beater because I don't want the almond paste to break up. I want it to stay in nice little chunks. So let me just clean up a little bit here so I get my bowl out with my almond paste, and we'll mix that in by hand. All right, so we're going to get our little chunks of almond paste in. Try not to get big clumps of it. You do want this all mixed nicely, evenly through the batter so that you can be sure every slice is going to get some almond paste. This is the best part of the loaf, I think, is the almond paste. It's so good. It's definitely an ingredient you see in a lot of Dutch type baking, the almond paste. So I am going to get this mixed in, divide it into my loaf pans. So I'll show you that just before I put it in the oven. We're going to put it in a 350-degree oven, and we're going to bake it for an hour. So let me just get this in, and I'll show you what that looks like in the pans. All right, so we're getting our batter into the loaf pans. Try to get them in a little bit even. If you get a little bit too much in one, just transfer it over to the other. Delicious. This is going to be so good. All right, so my loaf was in the oven for, I did an hour and 10 minutes because my toothpick didn't quite come out clean at the 1 hour mark. So you do want to make sure that it's cooked all the way through, and we're going to wait for this to cool down completely. We'll take it out of the loaf pans and let it cool on the rack completely before we cut into it, and I'll show you what it looks like on the inside when it's cooled. Alright, so let's take a look. Inside we've got nice chunks of almond paste that are going to be throughout the whole loaf, and this is delicious. So I usually cut them in half and I put them in the freezer and just freeze half at a time, so I only take out half for a couple of days. So give this one a try. Great recipe. It's there on the counter. Take a look.